Harper. I am the president of the American Mock Trial Association, and I am delighted to welcome you to the championship trial of One Last Time, our first ever online mock trial competition, and a competition for seniors whose final tournaments were eliminated because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have two fantastic teams that are ready to go in this final trial, and we have an excellent and distinguished panel of judges. I'm honored to introduce to you the panel of judges who will watch this final trial and decide who wins one last time. I want to thank Professor Delois Leaphart, the chair of our Diversity and Inclusion Committee, for spearheading the efforts to secure this panel. And I want to also thank AMTA Tournament Administration Committee Chair and Diversity and Inclusion Committee Deputy Chair, Missy Watt, for recommending almost all of these judges this evening. Special thanks to both of you, and thanks to Professor Leaphart for inviting our presiding judge. As I introduce the judges, please turn on your video so that we can see you as we learn a little bit about you. First, Barrett Anderson. Barrett is a litigation associate at the Cooley Law Firm in San Diego, California, where his practice includes a wide variety of trial and appellate matters. He's a former AMTA competitor at the University of Iowa, where he was captain of the mock trial team, and he's a graduate of the Yale Law School, where he received the school's top award for trial advocacy. Barrett is also a member of the Leadership Council on Legal Diversity. Thanks very much, Barrett. Amanda Bond. Amanda is a litigation partner at Sussman Godfrey in Los Angeles, California. She's one of the youngest women ever to be named a partner at her firm, where she litigates high-stakes cases in state and federal courts across the country. Amanda is a former AMTA competitor at UCLA and a graduate of the Stanford Law School. She's also a two-time AMTA national champion and a two-time AMTA All-American Award winner. Thank you very much, Amanda. Nick Gowan. Nick is a litigation partner at Burke, Warren, McKay, and Saratella in Chicago. He represents Fortune 500 companies and middle market companies and commercial business disputes across the United States. He's an AMTA alum and an honors graduate of the University of Illinois at Chicago and of the University of Illinois College of Law. Nick was chairman of the Board of Trustees at Chicago State University, and he was supposed to be the keynote speaker at our award ceremony at the National Championship Tournament, and he was supposed to judge in our National Championship final round. So we're thrilled to have Nick on this panel. Adria Kimbrough. Adria is the pre-law advisor and director of the mock trial program at Dillard University. She is also of counsel of the Coleman Law Firm, where her practice includes labor and employment law. She was previously an associate general counsel for the University of Arkansas System, and she is an honors graduate of Talladega College and the University of Cincinnati College of Law. Adria founded the Dillard mock trial team in 2016, and very soon after, that team qualified for ORCS, and as many of you around the circuit know, is a fierce AMTA competitor. So thank you very much, Adria, for joining us. Tanya Long. Tanya is an assistant United States attorney in Grand Rapids, Michigan. She was previously a law clerk to a United States district judge and a United States circuit judge on the Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. Tanya was on the inaugural Northwood University mock trial team in 2005, and after graduating, she went on to be a teacher for Teach for America, and she is an alum of the Harvard Law School. Tanya, we're honored that you're joining us this evening. Whitney O'Byrne. Whitney is a litigation attorney at Dury Tangri in San Francisco, California, where she represents a wide array of clients in complex commercial litigation, regulatory, and white-collar criminal proceedings. She's a former competitor at Washington University in St. Louis and a graduate of the Columbia Law School. Whitney also served previously as a law clerk in the Eastern District of New York and litigated at a top law firm in New York City, as well as a boutique in New York before moving to San Francisco. Thanks so much, Whitney, for being on the panel. Imokai Okolu. Imokai is an incoming litigation associate at Jones Day. He was a member of the Miami University mock trial team, and he's a graduate of the University of Akron School of Law. Imokai is a particularly special member of this panel because, as some of you may know, he was the nation's first ever online mock trial competition winner. He finished first in a field of 170 competitors from 67 law schools in the first ever national online trial advocacy competition that was organized by the UCLA School of Law earlier this year. Imokai is also a national runner-up twice in law school trial advocacy competitions, and he twice participated in the Top Gun competition, where he was a semifinalist. Imokai, thanks for joining us. Jamar Walker. Jamar is an assistant United States attorney in the criminal division of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia. He was previously an attorney in private practice, and he served as a law clerk to a federal district court judge in the Eastern District of Virginia. Jamar is an alumni of the UVA mock trial program and has worked as a coach for the University of Virginia. He's a two-time national champion with AMTA and a graduate of the University of Virginia Law School. Thanks, Jamar. Dr. Sarah Ziegler. Dr. Ziegler is the Dean of the College of Letters, Arts, and Social Sciences at Eastern Kentucky University, where her research focuses on gender politics and equality jurisprudence. Dean Ziegler has been a director of the EKU mock trial program and served as AMTA's president from 2008 through 2010. She's also a member of the inaugural AMTA Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and she's an emeritus director of the AMTA Board of Directors. Dean Ziegler, thank you very much for joining tonight. And finally, our presiding judge, Judge David Nelmark. Judge Nelmark is a district court judge in the 5C Judicial Election District in Iowa, and he's past president of the Polk County Bar Association. He was an AMTA competitor at Drake University, where he graduated first in his class. He graduated from Stanford Law School and was integral to AMTA's hosting of the national championships in Des Moines in Iowa in 2009 and 2011. David is a former AMTA board member, a former tab director of AMTA, and he was AMTA's 5th president. He's also the first former competitor to serve as president of AMTA. So thank you very much, Judge Nelmark, for agreeing to preside over this final round. And thanks to all of our final round judges for donating your time tonight. And with that, I will turn it over to Judge Nelmark to begin our trial.
Thank you. Scoring judges, you should make sure that your audio and video are off unless the bailiff tells you otherwise. You should also have your video set to hide all non-video participants. That means right now you should see the advocates and me. Here come the advocates. We are on the record in case number OLT-2020. Counsel, could you make your appearances beginning with the plaintiff?
Of course. Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Sonali Mehta. Today I'm joined by my co-counsel, Mr. Elias Nybart.
Good evening, Your Honor.
Good evening.
And together we represent the plaintiff in today's case, Ms. Stevie Rogers.
Good evening, Your Honor.
And the defense.
Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Katie Burdett, and I am joined today along with my co-counsel, Mr. Harsha Sridhar.
Good evening, Your Honor.
and we represent the defendant in today's case, Miss Drew Mars.
Good evening, Your Honor.
Very good. We will now hear the opening statements from each party. Everyone should make sure they are in speaker view. That button is in the upper right of your screen. And attorneys, please remember to mute your audio when the other attorney is speaking. With that, begin when you're ready.
Your Honor, before we get to opening statements, the plaintiff does have just a few housekeeping matters before we start.
Okay, go ahead.
First off, we wanted to draw the court's attention to a pretrial order by Judge Page. Previously, Judge Page ruled that exhibits 1 through 7 have already been admitted into evidence.
Ms. Burdett, is that your understanding?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. The court will admit those exhibits.
Next, Your Honor, we would like to ask your permission when entering exhibits into evidence outside those exhibits 1 through 7, if we can go ahead and put them up on the screen to show them to the witness constructively outside the eyeshot of the jury until they've been received into evidence.
Ms. Burdett, sound good to you?
Sounds good with us, Your Honor.
All right, that's approved.
Finally, Your Honor, we did want to note that there was a police investigation in today's case, which found facts relevant to today's proceedings. Unfortunately, here in Midlands, we're not able to subpoena police officers, but we will be hearing from a private investigator who worked with the police. And again, per that same pretrial order by Judge Page, Ms. Bond, that private investigator, can testify about the contents of the police report from today's case.
Ms. Burdett, is that your understanding?
Yes, we're okay with the private investigator testifying to the contents specifically of that police report since it's already in evidence.
Okay. Anything else?
Nothing further from the plaintiff, Your Honor.
Anything from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. We'd just like to invoke Rule 603, which calls for the constructive pre-swearing of all witnesses.
Okay, all witnesses can assume they've been sworn in. Anything else?
Yes, Your Honor. We'd also like to invoke Rule 615, which calls for the constructive sequestration of all witnesses, barring party representatives. The party representative for the defense is, of course, Ms. Mars, the defendant.
Okay. All non-party representatives will be constructively sequestered. Anything else?
No, Your Honor. With that, the defense is ready to proceed into openings.
Okay. We will go back to the plaintiff for openings. And again, judges, please turn to speaker view.
May it please the court? Desperation, drugs, deceit. On August 14th, 2018, the defendant, Drew Mars, a home nurse, stood next to Agatha Lee's bed. Agatha Lee was the defendant's boss, a wealthy, elderly, famous author. In one hand, the defendant held a small purple pill, an arthritis medication that Agatha Lee took every single night. In the other hand, she held an identical purple pill. But this one, it wasn't arthritis medication. It was a drug so dangerous to Agatha Lee that a single pill could stop her heart. The defendant switched the pills, knowing that her boss would take whatever her nurse gave her. By the next morning, Agatha Lee was dead, and the defendant was $20 million richer. You see, members of the jury, when Agatha Lee died, she left her fortune to the defendant. She had written a will which stated that everything she owned, her mansion, her famous book, and almost $20 million in cash would all go to the defendant. But members of the jury, here in Midlands, we have a law called the Slayer Statute. That means that we don't allow anyone to kill another person and then inherit their money. That's why Agatha Lee's family has brought this lawsuit, to make sure the defendant doesn't walk away with Miss Lee's entire estate. That means that it's our job to prove to you that it is more likely than not that Drew Mars, the defendant, intentionally killed Agatha Lee. We're going to meet that burden today. And we're going to do that by showing you three things. First, the defendant was desperate for Agatha's money. Second, we're going to show you the drugs the defendant used to kill her. And third, the deceit the defendant used to cover her tracks. Now, I'm going to walk you through our case one part at a time. First, you're going to learn that the defendant was desperate for Agatha Lee's money. See, the defendant had a sick sibling, and she needed that money to take care of her family. You're going to learn that the defendant decided to kill when it looked like that money was slipping through her fingers. You'll hear that the very day before Agatha Lee died, she decided she was going to change her will, leave her money to her family instead of to the defendant. And I want you to pay attention when you hear how the defendant reacted to that conversation. How her face turned red, how she clenched her fists and said, "No way." How she got desperate. Next, we're going to show you the drugs the defendant used to kill. You're going to hear today that Agatha Lee had an allergy to a medicine called chloroandramine. Members of the jury, as Agatha's nurse, the defendant was one of the only people who knew about this allergy. As her nurse, she was one of the only people in the world who knew that chloroandramine pills looked identical to the arthritis medication that Agatha Lee took every single night. Today, you're going to get to hear from Miss Stevie Rogers. That's Agatha's granddaughter. She'll tell you about a conversation she had with the defendant just weeks before Agatha Lee died, where the defendant said, "Just one pill of chloroandramine, and Agatha would be dead." Finally, we're going to show you the deceit the defendant used to cover her tracks. You see, when the police officers started asking questions about how and why Agatha died, the defendant knew they were onto her. So when her name was read at a will reading in front of Agatha's family and friends, she lied. She stood up, covered her mouth, and said over and over again, "I had no idea." Today, you're going to hear from Miss Mary Bond, a private investigator who Agatha's family hired to look into Agatha's death. She'll tell you about an email she found that the defendant wrote months before Agatha died. Months before the defendant said, "I had no idea." She said, "I get everything. The house, the money, everything." You see, members of the jury, over the course of today's trial, we expect the defense is going to tell you this is all one big misunderstanding. That Agatha's family is suing because they want a piece of the money, but members of the jury, the evidence is going to tell you a different story. The evidence is going to show how desperate the defendant was for the money, how she used drugs to get that money, and how she deceived everyone. Desperation, drugs, deceit. At the end of today's trial, we're going to ask you to see through that deception. We're going to ask you to find Drew Mars liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Does the defense wish to give its opening statement at this time?
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. It was murder, but it wasn't Mars. On August 15th, 2018, Drew Mars walked into the room of a woman she had cared for over 10 years, Miss Agatha Lee. Miss Lee wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. Panicked, Drew Mars sought help from the only other person living in that house, Miss Lee's estranged granddaughter, the plaintiff who had only shown up at the house a month prior. But you'll learn today that the plaintiff's reaction to learning her only living family member was now dead wasn't shock. It was to hire a private investigator, and before that investigator got there, before the autopsy, before the toxicology report, the plaintiff was already accusing Miss Mars of murder. Opposing counsel just got up here and told you that we were going to say this was all just a big misunderstanding, a coincidence. But that's not what this case is about, because we agree it was murder, but it wasn't Mars. You'll learn today that it was the plaintiff. You'll learn today that the plaintiff arrived at Lee Manor with a single goal in mind: to get back in her grandmother's will. The plaintiff had already blown through a $2 million trust fund, and now she had her eyes set on her grandmother's $25 million estate. The evidence will show when the plaintiff realized that her grandmother wasn't going to give her a single penny of that money, she had to get creative. She had to come up with a plan. And today you'll learn that the plaintiff killed Miss Lee. The evidence will show that the plaintiff planted evidence and paid off an investigator to try and pin it all on Drew Mars. You may be asking yourself why. How would the plaintiff benefit from her grandmother's death? Well, it's actually quite simple. You see, when Miss Lee decided to take the plaintiff out of the will, she decided to name her caretaker of 10 years, Drew Mars, the sole heir to that $25 million estate. Now, Drew Mars is the only thing standing between the plaintiff and that money. And the only way for the plaintiff to get that $25 million is for her grandmother's will to be overturned. And that brings us to today. That brings us to the final step of the plaintiff's plan. Because you see, there's a law here in Midlands called the Slayer Statute. And you'll learn today that the plaintiff was aware of this law long before the legal proceedings today. In order for the plaintiff to get that money, they have to prove that Drew Mars, the person set to inherit the estate, knowingly or purposefully killed Miss Lee. And you see, they won't be able to, because it was murder, but it wasn't Mars. We, as the defense, we don't have a burden of proof, but we will show you who actually was responsible for Miss Lee's death by calling two witnesses. First, you'll be introduced to Drew Mars, Miss Lee's living caretaker of over 10 years. Miss Mars will tell you about her relationship with Miss Lee, that the two of them were as close as family. She'll also tell you about a conversation she overheard on August 14th, the day Miss Lee was poisoned. Because you see, the opposing counsel got up here and already tried to characterize that conversation to you. But what actually happened was quite different. You see, in that conversation, Miss Lee told the plaintiff that she wasn't going to get a single cent of that estate. The plaintiff left that meeting, looked Drew Mars dead in the eye, and said, "Don't count your millions yet." Less than 24 hours later, Miss Lee was found dead. Next, you're going to hear from Mr. Ryan Cabrera. He's a writer who was in the process of writing Miss Lee's biography. And he'll tell you that the plaintiff's claim that Miss Lee was going to give that money back to the plaintiff, put her back in the will, well, that just doesn't match up with what Miss Lee was saying and doing in the months leading up to her death. Members of the jury, you're going to learn today that it was the plaintiff who orchestrated her grandmother's death. Now the plaintiff is trying to pin it all on Drew Mars to get that $25 million. The plaintiff's going to get up here. They're going to try and tell you a story of murder. And it was murder, but it wasn't Mars. That's why at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Mr. Harsha Sridhar, will stand before you and ask that you find for Drew Mars. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Before the plaintiff calls its first witness, I'll ask everyone to switch to gallery view. That button is again on the upper right of your screen. That will allow you to see the attorneys and the witness at the same time. We still have a witness coming in here.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Stevie Rogers to the stand.
All right. Ms. Rogers has appeared, and as we discussed, all witnesses are sworn, so go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor. Hi, Ms. Rogers. Before I begin, can you see and hear me all right?
Yes, ma'am, I can.
Could you start by introducing yourself to the court?
Hello, my name is Stevie Rogers.
Ma'am, do you know somebody named Agatha Lee?
I do. Agatha was my grandmother.
Tell us about her.
She was a writer. Growing up, the best part of the week was always visiting Nana. She practically raised me. I really loved her.
Could you tell us about the rest of your family?
Growing up, it was just me and my parents. We spent a lot of time in New Zealand for my dad's work, but back in 2008, we were in a car crash and both my parents passed away. I was 20 at the time.
Ms. Rogers, how did your life change after your parents passed?
It was hard, really hard. I tried to keep going. I enrolled in law school, but eventually I had to drop out because I wasn't keeping up. I lost touch with everyone, even Nana. At the time, I just wanted to forget about everything.
Ma'am, did that ever change?
Yeah. At some point, I realized my parents wouldn't have wanted me to end up like this, so I started getting my life back on track. I went to rehab. I started reconnecting with people. That was in 2018.
Ms. Rogers, would you mind telling the members of the jury about your financial situation in that year, 2018?
It wasn't great. I had access to a trust fund my parents set up before they passed, but I had enough to get by.
Did you speak with your grandmother at any point in that year?
Yeah. At the beginning of 2018, Nana sent me a letter telling me that she was taking me out of her will and that she was leaving everything to her caretaker, Drew Mars, instead.
Objection, Your Honor. At this point, best evidence. May I be heard?
You may.
Your Honor, Rule 1002 says that in order to prove the contents of a document, the document itself must be entered if it's available. Now, the letter that this witness is referring to, it's available for this case, and opposing counsel can enter it. In fact, they have to in order to talk about those contents.
May I respond, Your Honor? Yes, Your Honor. Like Mr. Sridhar just stated, Rule 1002 requires a party to enter a written document such as this letter if we're trying to prove the contents of the document. In this case, Your Honor, the contents that Ms. Rogers just mentioned, that Ms. Rogers was being removed from the will and Drew Mars was being put into the will, Your Honor, we're not using these statements to prove that content because both parties have already agreed to that fact. We don't need the letter to prove it.
Anything further?
No, Your Honor.
Objections overruled.
So, Ms. Rogers, you were telling us about a letter you received from your grandmother. Could you finish?
Yeah. Nana said that she was taking me out of her will. Honestly, though, I understood. I knew I had messed up really bad by not staying in contact with her.
Did you see her in person at any point after she sent you that letter?
Yeah. I went to visit her in her house in Midlands after I got out of rehab. I really wanted to be with family at the time.
Ma'am, could you tell us about your relationship with your grandmother after you moved back in with her?
Things were really good. We were spending tons of time together, playing games, telling stories. I was finally feeling like myself again.
Ma'am, earlier you mentioned that your grandmother was leaving her money to someone named Drew Mars. Who is that?
Drew is my grandmother's caretaker. She lived with Nana.
Ma'am, what was your relationship like with the defendant, Drew Mars?
If I'm being honest, we didn't really have one. We didn't talk much, but every day she was asking me how long I planned to stay or when I was planning on leaving.
All right, Ms. Rogers, I want to go ahead and fast forward to the day of August 14th. And I want to keep a timeline of what happened on that day. Mr. Nybart, could we get that on the screen? So, ma'am, how did that day, August 14th, start out for you?
It was pretty normal. I made breakfast for Nana like usual, and we spent the morning together in her study.
Did you happen to speak with your grandmother about her will on that morning?
Yeah, we did. Nana told me that she felt like we had finally reconnected and that she felt so grateful. She said that she was planning on changing her will to put me back into it and leave everything to me instead of Drew.
Ma'am, what time was that conversation with your grandmother?
It's right before we left for lunch, at 11:30.
So what happened after your grandmother told you she was leaving all of her money to you?
Well, we left the study and I practically ran into Drew. She was standing right outside the door.
Well, ma'am, what did you see Drew Mars doing?
When I ran into her, her fists were clenched and her face was all red. She looked at me and she said, "No way."
Ma'am, what happened after that?
Nana had a lunch meeting and then we spent the rest of the day together. She went to bed after we finished watching a movie around 9:30 and I went downstairs.
Well, did you see the defendant at any point after you said goodnight to your grandmother?
I did. When I was going downstairs, I saw Drew. She was going from my bedroom across the hall to my Nana's room. It was between 9:35 and 9:40.
Oh, could you see if the defendant was holding anything?
I'm not sure. She held her hand with her palm up and her fingers curled like this.
Ms. Rogers, what did you do after you saw the defendant walking towards your grandmother's room with her palm up and her fingers curled?
Honestly, I didn't think anything of it. I watched TV downstairs for a bit and then I fell asleep.
All right, Ms. Rogers, I know this is difficult, but I do have to ask you about what happened the next morning. Could you tell us what happened when you woke up?
Drew woke me up around 8:30. She told me that my Nana wasn't moving.
Well, ma'am, what did you do?
I ran to Nana's room. She was lying in her bed, but she wasn't moving. Her eyes were closed, but she wasn't breathing, and she didn't have a pulse.
What happened next?
I called 911. I keep standing there just hoping that she would wake up, but nothing happened. I didn't understand how this could happen. Just yesterday, my Nana and I had been talking. I thought she was fine. I didn't understand.
Ms. Rogers, did you call anybody else besides the police on that morning?
I called a private investigator. Something about the whole thing just seemed wrong to me. This shouldn't have happened. I wanted to make sure that we found out the truth.
Miss Rogers, did the police ever tell you what your grandmother's cause of death was?
Yes, ma'am. The police told me that she had an allergic reaction to chlorantramine. That's a heartburn medication that she's really allergic to.
Did you ever speak with the defendant about chlorantramine?
One night, while Stevie and I were, well, Drew and I were eating dinner together, she brought it up out of the blue. She said, "Your Nana is really allergic to chlorantramine. If she took even one pill, she'd be dead."
Mr. Nybart, could we zoom out and put that testimony on the timeline, please? You can take the timeline down now. Thank you, sir. Now, ma'am, earlier you mentioned that your grandmother decided to leave her money to you instead of to Drew Mars. Did she do that before she died?
No. She died the day after she told me she was going to put me back on her will and take Drew out.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. Your Honor, I have nothing further at this point.
Okay, thank you. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. And Ms. Rogers, before we begin, do you need a moment?
Fine, sir. Thank you so much.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Ms. Rogers, I want to start right there where you left off. You mentioned that Agatha Lee died of an allergic reaction to a drug called chlorantramine, right?
Yes, sir. It's a heartburn medication.
And like you said, you had been aware that Agatha Lee was allergic to that drug.
That's right. Drew told me that Agatha was allergic.
You learned about that allergy in the first week of August.
That's right. Drew told me.
Drew Mars told you that Agatha was deadly allergic to that drug, right?
Yes, sir.
But Drew Mars also told you something that you didn't tell us before. Drew Mars told you that was an over-the-counter drug, right?
Yes, sir. That's what Drew said.
Over-the-counter, that means you can buy it at a pharmacy.
Yes, sir.
That means you can buy it without a prescription.
Yes, sir. That's how I understand it, yes.
And ma'am, 2 weeks after you learned that Agatha Lee was deadly allergic to a drug you could buy over the counter, Miss Lee was dead.
Yes, sir. That's right.
She died in the same house where you were living.
Yes, sir. She died in the room right next to me. I didn't know anything had happened at the time.
Ma'am, I want to talk about where you were on August 14th, 2018 then. Now, you claim you were at Lee Manor all day, at that house where Agatha Lee lived, right?
Yes, sir.
But ma'am, you can't actually prove that, can you?
No, sir. I was home alone that day.
Oh, ma'am, you had a car, right?
That's right.
And so you can't prove to us that you didn't drive that car to a pharmacy to pick up chlorantramine.
No, sir. Chlorantramine wasn't allowed in the house. It was too dangerous for Nana. She might have mistaken it for one of her other medications. It wasn't allowed.
Oh, ma'am, your grandmother and Drew Mars, they weren't guarding the door of the house at all times, right?
No, sir, of course not.
So if you wanted, you could certainly bring chlorantramine inside the house.
I guess so. It would be way too dangerous, though.
Oh, ma'am, like you said a few minutes ago, you were actually home alone at times that day.
Yes, sir, that's right.
So let's talk about that home for a second, Lee Manor. Now, you lived there for about 6 weeks, right?
That's right.
You spent a lot of time in that house.
Yes, sir.
And ma'am, in all your time at Lee Manor, the only door you ever saw with a lock on it was Agatha Lee's bedroom door.
Yes, sir, that's right.
So as far as you know, ma'am, there's no lock preventing you from walking into Drew Mars's bedroom?
Not that I know of, no.
No lock that would prevent you from dropping a bag in Drew Mars's closet?
I guess not. I never went into Drew's room.
Oh, ma'am, that's not my question, whether you went or not. I'm just asking if there was a lock that would prevent you from doing that. And as far as you know, there wasn't a lock that would prevent you from doing that.
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of personal knowledge. May I be heard?
You may.
Your Honor, Mr. Sridhar is asking her to say whether or not she could have done this specific action, put in a bag in the closet. She just said she's never been in that room. She doesn't know whether or not there is a lock on that closet.
May I respond, Your Honor?
May.
My question was tailored specifically to the witness's knowledge. My question started with, as far as you know. And so the witness is free to give a yes or a no based on the scope of her knowledge, Your Honor. I'm not asking for anything beyond that.
Anything further?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Rogers has already testified she's never been in that room. She has no way of knowing whether or not there's a lock on the door. Mr. Sridhar has already established that she hasn't been in that room. And this further question about what she could do if she was in that room is outside her personal knowledge.
Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. So like you said, Ms. Rogers, as far as you know, there's no lock that would prevent you from entering either Drew Mars's bedroom or closet.
Not that I know of.
Well, ma'am, when you were home alone on August 14th, 2018, you knew something else. You knew that Agatha Lee took medication, right?
Yes, sir. It was Drew Mars who handled her medication.
Right. Of course, Miss Lee wasn't picking those medications out of the jars and bottles herself, right?
No, sir. Drew used an organizer. She was the one who managed Agatha's medication.
That's right. Agatha Lee took those pills from a pill organizer that you saw on her bedside table, right?
That's right.
And you knew that every night Miss Lee took medication from that organizer.
That's right.
Ma'am, I want to talk about your financial gains from Agatha Lee's death. Now, about 5 days after Agatha Lee died, you filed this lawsuit, right?
Yes, sir.
That's August 20th, 2018?
Yes, sir.
August 20th, 2018. Ma'am, isn't that before the police finished their investigation?
That's right. Something about the whole situation just didn't seem right to me. My Nana was healthy and she was happy. I didn't understand how she could have just passed away.
You filed this lawsuit before your own private investigator finished his investigation.
Yes, sir.
Ma'am, you filed this lawsuit before the toxicology report came back.
Yes, sir. The whole thing didn't make sense. My Nana was a healthy woman.
Ma'am, in your own words, you knew exactly what that toxicology report was going to say.
Yes, I knew that it was going to show that my grandmother was murdered.
I'd say yes, ma'am. You knew exactly what that toxicology report was going to say.
Yes, sir. I knew that it would prove that my grandmother didn't just die in her sleep. She was murdered.
Well, ma'am, this lawsuit you're filing, you're saying that because you think Drew Mars killed Agatha Lee, the entirety of Agatha Lee's estate should go to you, right?
Yes, sir. That's right.
Then let's talk about your financial history with the victim. Like you said, back in 2008, Agatha Lee made you the sole inheritor of her will, right?
That's right.
And can we put a timeline up, Miss Burdett? 3 years later, you dropped out of law school, right?
Yes, sir. After my parents died, things became kind of difficult. I had to drop out because I wasn't keeping up with classes.
And Agatha Lee, well, she wasn't happy about that, right?
That's what Nana told me.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Response?
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
If this witness's grandmother told her, "I'm not happy," then under Rule 8033, that's a statement of then existing mental and emotional condition, the emotional condition of unhappiness. It's a hearsay exception.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, just because she said the words that she wasn't happy, this doesn't meet the 8033 exception. Regretting or being disappointed in your granddaughter for dropping out of law school, that's not the same thing as feeling the emotion of unhappiness, Your Honor. This certainly does not meet that exception.
Mr. Schrinder, what were the words you're trying to elicit or that the witness said?
Yes, Your Honor. The words the witness said was, my grandmother told me she wasn't happy about that.
Well, based on that answer, the objection's overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Can we put that up on the timeline, Ms. Burdett? Then I want to talk about this next 7 years.
Your Honor, at this point, I would raise an objection to attorney testifying. The statement that we just agreed fell under Rule 8033 was that her grandmother wasn't happy with that. This says that Agatha Lee disapproves. Your Honor, the fact that she disapproves certainly does not meet that 8033 exception, and it's also not what Ms. Rogers testified to.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
First of all, disapproval is certainly an emotional or mental condition that exists at the time. And I would also argue that the distinction here between being unhappy with something and disapproving something is purely semantic.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, we understand the court's interpretation that feeling not happy about something is an emotional state. Your Honor, disapproving something just simply isn't an emotional state. This was Agatha Lee expressing she didn't like the choice that Stevie Rogers made. That's not an emotional state, Your Honor. It doesn't fit Rule 8033.
In light of the potential limitations with the exhibit, the objection is noted but overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. I want to talk about this next 7 years, Ms. Rogers, because when Ms. Burdett and I deposed you, we asked you about how your relationship with Ms. Lee changed after 2011, right?
That's right.
And you told us you were still close.
That's right.
Let's talk about how close you were. Between 2011 and July 4th, 2018, you called Agatha Lee once.
That's right. After my parents died, I lost contact with a lot of people. That included Nana.
Ma'am, Agatha Lee, she'd write you letters sometimes, right?
Yes, sir.
You never wrote her a letter back.
No, I regret it so much now. I wish I could go back and change it.
And ma'am, all this time you didn't hold a regular job, right?
No, sir. I was a writer, so I wrote on and off over the years.
And ma'am, to get by, you were living off a $2 million trust fund, right?
Yes, sir. When my parents died, they left money behind for me to go to college, that sort of thing.
Well, ma'am, you mentioned on direct examination that you got a letter from Agatha Lee in February 2018, and I want to talk about that letter. You'd recognize it if I showed it to you, right?
Yes, I think I would.
Ms. Burdett, can we get Exhibit 10 up screen? That's that letter, right?
I'm sorry, hold on. Yes, sir, that's right. I'm sorry.
No worries. It's a fair and accurate copy of that letter, right, ma'am?
Yes, sir, it looks like it.
At this time, defense moves Exhibit 10 into evidence.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor. Objection to hearsay. Now, we understand that 2 lines in this letter are not hearsay, as we've already agreed and stipulated to them, where it says, I've decided to change my will, and I'm going to sign a new will, leaving everything to Drew. That's in the second to last paragraph, Your Honor. We have no objection to those 2 statements in particular, but the rest of the document, Your Honor, is hearsay.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. Rule 8033 also allows for statements of motive to be admissible. And the rest of this letter, Your Honor, specifically the 3rd and the 4th paragraph, those describe Agatha Lee's motivations. As opposing counsel mentioned, we've all agreed that this letter basically culminates in Miss Lee's intent, the intent to remove the plaintiff from the will. But paragraphs 3 and 4 in particular, Your Honor, describe the motivation behind that intent, why she's making that decision. And thus, that's also admissible under Rule 8033.
Anything further?
Yes, Your Honor. These aren't statements of motive. And furthermore, Agatha Lee's motivations have no relevance to today's case. We're here to discuss Drew Mars, and because the defense has put it at issue, Stevie Rogers as well. Your Honor, Agatha Lee's motivations just aren't relevant to what we're doing here today. Now, we agree those 2 lines about the will are in fact statements of intent. But the rest of the document is hearsay, Your Honor.
Your Honor, just to be clear, is opposing counsel amending their objection to relevance?
Well, the objection is sustained on the hearsay grounds. Exhibit 10, as it appears on the screen, is not admitted. If you have a redacted version that you can put up or that you can constructively offer, I would admit that.
Yes, Your Honor. We'll go ahead and constructively redact it.
So,
And Ms. Burdett, can we move to the admitted paragraph and consider the rest constructively redacted? We recognize that only 2 of the sentences that are going to come up on screen are admitted.
that's fine.
Now, in this letter, ma'am, Agatha Lee says she's removing you from the will, right?
Yes, sir.
And she's naming Drew Mars her inheritor, right?
Yes, sir. That's what Agatha told me.
You said something interesting in the deposition when you got this letter. You said when you got this letter, you weren't sweating it, right?
Yes, sir.
And one of the reasons for that is you still had money left in that $2 million trust fund.
Yes, sir. That's right.
Now, in June of 2018, ma'am, that's when that trust fund finally ran dry.
Yes, sir. That's when I finally got out of rehab.
Well, ma'am, a month after that trust fund ran dry, that's when you met Agatha Lee for the first time in 7 years, right?
That's right. I was finally getting my life back together. I wanted to see Nana. I wanted her to see how proud I was of getting back on my own 2 feet.
Well, ma'am, a month after that, that's when you learned that Agatha Lee was deathly allergic to a drug called chloroandramine, right?
Yes, sir. Drew told me.
And 2 weeks after that, Agatha Lee was dead.
That's right.
Ma'am, you mentioned that
Go ahead. I couldn't wake her up.
Ma'am, you mentioned a minute ago that that $2 million trust fund was empty. Today, you're suing for Agatha Lee's whole estate, right?
Yes, sir. That's right.
And ma'am, you understand that the total value of that estate you're suing for is $25 million.
That's right. That's what my lawyers explained to me.
Thank you, ma'am. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Any redirect examination?
No redirect examination, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Rogers. You're excused. Is the plaintiff prepared to call your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. This time the plaintiff calls M. Bond to the stand.
Okay. Thank you. You may proceed with your questions.
Hi, Ms. Bond. Before I begin, can you hear and see me okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Can you state your name for the members of the jury?
Good evening. I'm Mary Bond.
Ms. Bond, what do you do for a living?
I'm a licensed private investigator here in Midlands.
What do you do as a private investigator?
Essentially, I'm hired to conduct additional investigation alongside the police. So I investigate crime scenes, collect evidence, interview witnesses, that sort of thing. And I try to answer questions that the police might not be able to.
Well, ma'am, how are you involved in today's case?
In August 2018, Stevie Rogers hired me to investigate the death of her grandmother, Agatha Lee. And so I worked closely with the police throughout their investigation.
Well, how did that investigation begin?
Well, Stevie Rogers called me the morning that her grandmother died. So I went straight to the Lee Manor. There I found Miss Rogers, Drew Mars, and, of course, Agatha's body.
When you found Miss Lee's body, what did you and police investigators do?
The first thing that we did was try to figure out cause of Miss Lee's death. And here that was a bit difficult because there were no visible wounds or bruising on Miss Lee's body.
Were you ever able to determine cause of death for today's case?
Yes, the coroner eventually conducted an autopsy, which I had access to, that confirmed Miss Lee's cause of death.
Would you recognize that autopsy in court today?
Yes, I believe I would.
Ms. Mehta, could we see that, please? Now, Ms. Bond, what are we looking at here?
This is the autopsy that I was just talking about.
Now, according to this autopsy, what was Miss Lee's cause of death?
Well, as you can see, Miss Lee died because of a fatal allergic reaction to a drug called chloroandramine.
Can you tell the members of the jury what's chloroandramine?
Sure. It's a very common heartburn pill. It's available over the counter at most pharmacies. I've taken it a few times myself. But according to the autopsy, Miss Lee was extremely allergic to the drug.
Now, if Agatha Lee was allergic to chloroandramine, I want to talk about how that could have ended up in her system. How did you go about investigating that question?
Right. So when I was investigating Miss Lee's medicines, I found that she took a daily arthritis pill that was exactly the same size, shape, and color to chloroandramine. So from there, the police and I began to investigate whether or not somebody could have swapped the two pills.
At this point in your investigation, did you have any suspects?
Yes, I did. Now, there were no signs of forced entry to the house. I mean, there were no windows broken or locks picked. So my two suspects were the two people who told me they were in the Lee Manor the night that Miss Lee died. That's Stevie Rogers and Drew Mars.
Now, ma'am, I want to talk about those people one at a time, starting with the defendant. Can you tell the members of the jury who is Drew Mars?
Drew Mars told me that she was Agatha's full-time nurse.
Now, why did you believe that Miss Mars was a suspect for today's case?
There were two reasons. First, I found that Miss Mars had access to Miss Lee's medications, and in fact, she told me that she was responsible for administering Miss Lee's medications. And second, I found that the defendant had the means and the opportunity to access chloroandramine the day that Miss Lee died.
Well, ma'am, how exactly could the defendant access chloroandramine?
Well, like I said, it's available over the counter. And I found that the defendant admitted to the police that she went to a pharmacy alone just hours before Miss Lee died. And she couldn't provide a receipt or an explanation for her visit there.
Now, ma'am, you just told us the defendant had access to chloroandramine. Did you find any evidence that she was in possession of chloroandramine?
Yes. We found a bag containing chloroandramine pills in Miss Mars' closet. The police and I took photographs of the bag and where it was found in the Lee Manor.
Would you recognize those photographs in court today?
Yes, I would.
Miss Meta, can we see exhibits 14, 15, and 17, please? Now, Miss Bond, what are we looking at here?
These are the pictures that we took in the defendant's room.
Are they fair and accurate copies?
Yes, they look like it.
Have they been changed or altered in any way?
No, they're the same as the last time I saw them.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff moves exhibits 14, 15, and 17 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
14, 15, and 17 are admitted.
Now, ma'am, you just told us this bag was found in the defendant's room. Where exactly in her room did you find it?
So we found the bag in the defendant's closet. As you can see here, it was, yes, tucked underneath the gray blanket there.
Well, ma'am, did you find any evidence that the defendant touched that bag where you found the pills in?
Yes. After finding the bag in the defendant's closet, we of course tested it for fingerprints, and we found a partial fingerprint on the bag's zipper that did belong to the defendant.
Miss Bond, earlier you mentioned that Stevie Rogers was also a suspect. Did you find any evidence that Stevie Rogers had chloroandramine in her possession?
No, I didn't find that Stevie Rogers possessed any chloroandramine.
Ma'am, you talked about that bag you found in the defendant's room. Did you find Stevie Rogers' fingerprints on that bag?
No, we didn't.
Did you find Stevie Rogers' fingerprints in the defendant's closet?
No.
Did you find Stevie Rogers' fingerprints anywhere in the defendant's room?
No, we didn't find Miss Rogers' fingerprints anywhere in the room.
Now, Miss Bond, I want to shift focus and talk about how the defendant acted after Miss Lee died. Miss Meta, can we see that timeline again, please? Now, Your Honor, for the record, we've redacted the portions that were testified to by Ms. Rogers, as to not violate 615. Now, Ms. Bond, did you find any evidence that the defendant would benefit from Ms. Lee's death?
Yes, I was present at Miss Lee's will reading, where it was revealed that Drew Mars was to inherit the entirety of Agatha's estate.
Well, how did the defendant react to hearing that information?
She stood up, she gasped, and she put her hands over her mouth. And then she said, "I cannot believe it. I had no idea." And she walked out of the room.
Well, Ms. Bond, when did that will reading take place?
The will reading was August 20th, 2018.
Well, ma'am, did you find any evidence that the defendant knew about that will before the will reading took place?
Yes, actually, I conducted a search of the defendant's computer, where I found an email which suggested that the defendant knew about the changes to the will 6 months before Agatha died.
Would you recognize that email in court today?
Yes, I would.
Ms. Mehta, can we see Exhibit 13, please? Now, Ms. Bond, what are we looking at here?
This is the email that I was talking about.
Is it a fair and accurate copy of that email?
Yes, it looks like it.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No.
Your Honor, this time the plaintiff moves Exhibit 13 into evidence.
Any objection to Exhibit 13?
No objection, Your Honor.
13 is admitted.
Now, Ms. Bond, you just told us this email suggested to you that the defendant knew about the will before the will reading. What exactly does this email say?
It says, "Agatha just told me she changed her will to leave everything to me. I get everything, the house, the money, everything. We're talking millions of dollars. This is going to totally change my life."
And Ms. Bond, when was this email sent?
It says it was dated February 1st, 2018. That's 6 months before she said that she had no idea.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Mehta, you can take down the timeline. At this point, Your Honor, we have no further questions.
Thank you. You may proceed with cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Miss Bond, I have a few more questions for you. Can you see and hear me all right?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Miss Burdett.
Miss Bond, you are a private detective, right?
Yes, that's correct. I'm licensed here in Midlands.
People hire you to answer their questions.
Yes, of course. I am hired to answer questions that the police might have a difficult time answering.
When your clients hire you, they expect results.
Yes, of course. I always conduct a very thorough investigation.
Let's talk about the question the plaintiff hired you to answer in today's case. At 8:45 a.m. on August 15th, 2018, you received a call from the plaintiff.
Yes, the plaintiff called me and I went straight to the Lee Manor.
The plaintiff told you that someone had murdered her grandmother.
Yes, Miss Rogers was extremely worried about what had happened to Miss Lee.
The plaintiff hired you to figure out who killed her.
Yes, exactly. She hired me to get to the bottom of what had happened to her grandmother.
To be clear, Miss Bond, the plaintiff is paying you $25,000 to answer that question for her.
Yes, of course. I'm a private investigator and I am paid for my work on cases. My client don't always like the answers that I find, but that's my job.
She is paying you $25,000 despite the fact the police were conducting their own simultaneous investigation.
Yes, of course. I work alongside the police.
When you got to Miss Lee's house at 9:25 a.m., the plaintiff, your client, already had an answer in mind, right?
Yes, Miss Rogers believed that Miss Mars had killed her grandmother.
That's right, and When you looked at Miss Lee's body, to you it looked like she had died from natural causes.
Initially, yes. Miss Lee was lying in bed, motionless, with the blanket pulled over her head. And like I mentioned, there were no wounds or bruising or any external abrasions.
When the plaintiff claimed that she thought Drew Mars murdered her grandmother, that was before the autopsy.
Yes, correct. And that's what Miss Rogers believed.
And that was before the toxicology report.
Yes, correct.
And 8 days later, you completed your investigation.
Yes, that's right.
And at the end of the investigation, you decided that you agreed with your client.
Yes, ultimately, that's the way the evidence pointed.
So I'm going to talk about that knowledge and opportunity that you talked about earlier, okay?
Of
You told
course.
us that your two suspects were Miss Mars and the plaintiff.
Yes, exactly. Those were the only two people inside the Lee Manor the night that Miss Lee died.
Miss Bond, you're aware that both Miss Mars and the plaintiff knew that Miss Lee was allergic to chloroandramine.
Yes, of course. Miss Mars was Miss Lee's nurse, and Miss Rogers was Miss Lee's granddaughter. So yes, they both were aware.
And like you told us a moment ago, chloroandramine's an over-the-counter drug.
Yes.
Both Drew Mars and the plaintiff could have gone to a pharmacy and bought it.
Yes, that's true, but the crucial determining factor here was that I only found evidence that Drew Mars went to a pharmacy that day. She admitted so to the police.
I'm just asking if either of them could have gotten their hands on it, and that's a yes, Miss Bond.
Yes, it's possible.
And you're aware that both Drew Mars and the plaintiff had access to Miss Lee's pill organizer.
Yes, correct, as they both lived in the Lee Manor.
Now I want to talk about that black bag you mentioned a few moments ago.
Of course.
You said you found a black bag with chloroandramine in Miss Mars's closet.
Yes, exactly.
To be clear, you found this bag a week after Miss Lee died.
Yes, we found it in a later search, that's correct.
You thought it was strange that Miss Mars would have kept that bag if she was actually the one responsible.
Yes, of course. A person doesn't always hold on to the murder weapon after a crime, but it does happen.
Well, to be clear, you don't know if that bag of chloroandramine was the murder weapon, Miss Bond.
Those were the pills of chloroandramine that we found in the Lee Manor.
But to be clear, you don't know if those were the pills that Miss Lee took from that bottle.
We can't be certain, but those were the only pills that we found in the house.
You also mentioned that you found, or the police found, one of Miss Mars's fingerprints on that bag.
Yes, exactly. We found a partial print on the bag's zipper.
That partial print was on the outside of the bag.
Yes, the only readable or usable print was on the outside of the bag.
There were none of Drew Mars's fingerprints on the inside of that bag.
There were no fingerprints on the inside of the bag. They were all unusable, just smudges.
There were none of Drew Mars's fingerprints on that bottle of chloroandramine.
No, again, the only prints that we found were a singular print for Drew Mars.
You mentioned that there were also some unusable prints, right?
Yes, exactly.
You don't know who those unusable prints belong to.
No, that is a limit of fingerprinting.
For all you know, those fingerprints could belong to the plaintiff.
That's possible. All I can tell you is that we only found one fingerprint, and that belonged to Drew Mars.
Now I want to talk about something you described as very important to your own opinion on who was responsible for Miss Lee's death.
Of course,
in your
yes.
own words, you believe that a link between Miss Mars and a motive, without that, your case would crumble.
Certainly. That's very important.
You personally believe Miss Mars was responsible because of a conversation that you believe she overheard between Miss Lee and the plaintiff.
Well, yes, we also have to consider the fact that Miss Mars knew that she was in the 2018 will and then lied about that knowledge a week after Miss Lee was found dead.
I'm not asking about that conversation, about that will reading. I'm talking about a conversation you believe that Miss Mars overheard between Miss Lee and the plaintiff discussing the estate.
Yes.
You don't
Sorry,
have any, excuse me, sorry, go on.
Sorry, I can't quite hear if you just asked a question. I'm sorry, it's breaking up.
Of course,
a bit.
I can repeat, Miss Bond.
Thank you.
You believe that Miss Mars overheard a conversation between Miss Lee and the plaintiff about Miss Lee's estate.
Yes, that's right.
But to be clear, you don't have any recordings of that conversation.
No, there were no security cameras inside the Lee Manor.
You don't have any witnesses besides the plaintiff that claim to have overheard that conversation.
No, there were no other witnesses.
That's right. The only evidence you have that that conversation occurred is what your client, the plaintiff, told you.
Yes, that's exactly true. Regardless of that conversation, I still cannot ignore the fact that Miss Mars lied about her knowledge of the will.
Miss Bond, I'm not talking about what you claim she did during the will reading. I'm asking you about that conversation that you believe was crucial to your determination that Miss Mars was responsible. And your only knowledge of that conversation you have is what your client told you.
Yes, of course, and that's part of the motive.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect for this witness?
No redirect, Your Honor. We just ask that the witness be excused.
And Ms. Bond, you are excused. Any further witnesses for the plaintiff?
Nothing further from the plaintiff at this point, Your Honor. We rest.
With the conclusion of the plaintiff's case in chief, we will take a 5-minute break. Everyone, please remember that this is being live streamed. We'll see you all again in 5 minutes.
So judges, this is the bailiff, Elizabeth Smiley. If you could just either let me know through a message in the chat box or by popping up on the screen to let me know that you're back. Then once everybody's back, we'll get together and start the second half of the trial. Thank you, Imokai and Nick. So I still haven't seen Barrett or Amanda. Sorry if you popped up and I wasn't looking. Amanda, okay, perfect. All right, it looks like everybody is back. Let me merge in the students real quick and then we can begin again. Great. It looks like everybody is back. We are ready to proceed, Judge Nelmark.
Back on the record in case number OLT-2020. Defense counsel, are you ready to call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Ms. Drew Mars to the stand. May I proceed? Yes, Your Honor. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hello, I'm Drew Mars.
Why are you here?
I'm here today because Stevie Rogers is accusing me of poisoning and murdering her grandmother, Agatha Lee. Miss Lee left me her estate, and Stevie, she's suing me to get it.
Did you poison Agatha Lee?
Of course not. I mean, the time that we had together, she took care of me more than I took care of her. She's like a grandmother to me. I saw her more than my own parents. I could never. I would never.
Who is Agatha Lee?
I guess you could say that Miss Lee was my boss, but it was a lot more complicated than that in reality. I mean, I started working for her in college, and when I graduated, I moved into her house, and it was like that, just the two of us for 10 years. I mean, I would wake up in the morning and the first person I'd see was her. We spent the whole day together. We shared our lives.
Do you know if Miss Lee had any relatives?
I know that she had one granddaughter, Stevie Rogers.
In the 10 years you took care of Miss Lee, how often did you see the plaintiff?
Maybe once, twice before we moved to Midlands in 2011, but after that, I didn't see Stevie until she showed up in 2018.
Did Miss Lee ever talk to you about her relationship with her granddaughter?
All the time. Yeah, you could see it really bothered her. She brought it up a lot. She told me that she felt hurt, that she would send Stevie letters, emails, even call her, but to no response.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay to that second half of that statement that Agatha would send letters, emails, calls to no response.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. I believe the witness said that she saw that Miss Lee would send letters and that the plaintiff wouldn't respond. That is within this witness's, I believe the objection was to hearsay?
Yes, Your Honor. I heard the witness say that these were things that Agatha Lee told her.
Your Honor, I believe these are things that the witness saw Miss Lee do. She saw her send letters and didn't see any responses. I can re-ask the witness the question to clarify.
Okay, go ahead. If you need to renew the objection after it's clarified, go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor.
Did Miss Lee ever talk to you about her relationship with the plaintiff? Did you see anything?
Yeah, I mean, she brought it up all the time. She told me she felt hurt that Stevie didn't seem interested in being around her anymore. And I saw her send tons of letters, call her, send her emails, but Stevie never really responded. She
Your
even
Honor,
broke down in tears.
excuse me, Ms. Mars. At this point, I would re-raise my objection, this time to lack of foundation. Now, we've heard her testify that she saw Miss Lee making calls or writing letters. We have no problem with that testimony. But the testimony that Stevie Rogers never responded, we understand that Miss Mars lived with Agatha Lee, but that's not enough foundation to say that Stevie Rogers never responded, that she knows every phone call, every letter that Miss Lee received. If that foundation is based on a statement, then it's hearsay, Your Honor.
Response to lack of foundation.
Yes, Your Honor. Like opposing counsel said, Miss Mars lived with Miss Lee. Now, she's not saying that Stevie Rogers never responded. She's saying that from what she saw, within her own personal knowledge and her perceptions, that she never saw any Stevie ever respond. This is well within this witness's rationally based perceptions, and she has laid that foundation.
May I respond, Your Honor?
No, the objection sustained. Counsel, you can rephrase the question if you wish.
Yes, Your Honor.
Did you strike that previous testimony, Your Honor?
So stricken.
Miss Mars, did you ever see the plaintiff respond to any of Miss Lee's letters?
Not that I could tell. I didn't see any responses, and we never saw Stevie. And a couple times Agatha, she broke down into tears, and she told me it felt like she had lost a grandchild.
You've been in court with us all day. Were you here when Miss Rogers said that in February of 2018, Miss Lee decided to remove her from the will?
Yes, ma'am, I heard her say that.
If Miss Lee removed the plaintiff from her will, do you know who she named as the new beneficiary of the will?
She named me.
How did you react when she told you?
I guess you could say shock. I mean, Miss Lee, she already paid for my board. She paid for the food I ate. She even paid for my education. She was already so generous to me. I didn't feel like this next act of kindness was something I deserved, but I guess you could say I was happy too. I mean, it was obvious that Miss Lee, she really valued our relationship and she valued me, and I was happy because she was really important to me too.
I want to talk to you about the morning of August 14th of 2018.
Okay.
Did you ever hear Miss Lee and the plaintiff discuss her estate?
Yeah, I did. I was bringing Miss Lee a cup of tea that morning, and when I got close to the study to give it to her, I heard her and Stevie talking.
What did the plaintiff say?
I heard Stevie ask Miss Lee to reconsider putting her back in her will. And then I heard Miss Lee say no.
How did Miss Lee respond?
I mean, after she said no, she said, "Stevie, I love you, but I'm not going to give you a penny."
Your Honor, at this time, could we please put up a timeline?
You may.
Did you hear anything else after that?
No. At that point, they stood up. I could hear them standing up, and then they went and they left. Miss Lee, she passed by me. She went to go get ready for her lunch with Ryan Cabrera, but Stevie stayed by the door. She waited till Miss Lee was out of earshot, and then she looked at me. She glared at me, and she said, "Don't count your millions yet."
After the plaintiff told you, "Don't count your millions yet," what did you do for the rest of the day?
I mean, after that, it was a pretty normal day. I cooked Miss Lee dinner like I did most nights, and her and Stevie ate it in the study around 6 p.m. And then I said goodnight to them at about 9:30 that night.
What happened the next morning?
Well, as I usually do, I went to Miss Lee's room at 8:30 that morning to give her a cup of coffee. But when I opened the door, Miss Lee, she wasn't moving. So I thought maybe she was still asleep. And I went over to try to shake her a little bit to try to wake her up. But I couldn't wake her up. I couldn't do anything. And so I checked her pulse and there was nothing. She was cold. And so I ran to Stevie's room. I knew I had to tell her. And I knocked on her door and I got Stevie and I got her to come over. And then she called the police. But when they showed up, the first thing that she did, she told them that I had murdered Miss Lee.
Miss Mars, I want to talk to you about the plaintiff.
Okay.
Do you know if the plaintiff was aware that Miss Lee was deathly allergic to chloroandramine?
Yeah, I know because I told her. I warned her that we didn't have any chloroandramine in the house because Miss Lee had a fatal allergy to the medication.
Do you know if the plaintiff knew how to get her hands on chloroandramine?
I know
Objection,
she.
Your Honor, calls for speculation.
Response.
Yes, Your Honor. I'm asking this witness whether or not she knows. This will go directly to this witness's, Miss Mars's own knowledge. And if I may proffer, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
This witness specifically told the plaintiff where to get it.
Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Do you know if the plaintiff knew how to get her hands on chloroandramine?
I do, because I told her that too. I warned her that you could buy it over the counter at any pharmacy. And I told her that she needed to double check every prescription that she got, whatever it was, however harmless she thought it was, because we could not have chloroandramine in the house.
Do you know if Miss Lee's bathroom had a lock on it?
It didn't. And not to my knowledge, no, ma'am.
Do you know if there were any locks that would prevent someone in the house from accessing Miss Lee's pill organizer?
No, it was in the bathroom. And like I said before, there was no locks to that door.
Miss Lee, or excuse me, Miss Mars, you've been in court today, and I want to give you a chance to address some things we've heard.
Okay.
First, I want to talk about that black bag that was found in your closet. Was that bag yours?
No, ma'am, it wasn't. I'm not sure whose it was. That closet was used as a storage closet by Miss Lee for all the years I was with her, and I don't even know half the stuff that was in there.
Do you know if you had ever touched that bag?
I can't say for sure. Every once in a while, Miss Lee asked me to go get things from there, and I guess I could have brushed it or moved it out of the way to get to something else, but not that I can remember.
Are there any locks on your door or your closet door that would prevent someone from entering your closet?
No, there was no locks on either of the doors. And like I said, it was a storage closet, so people went in and out of it.
I also want to talk to you about that will reading that occurred on August 20, 2018. Could you describe your reaction for us?
Yeah. At that moment, we were on day 4 or 5 of Stevie telling people that I had murdered Miss Lee. And she had a detective with her who said the same exact thing. And as they read that will, everybody turned and they looked at me, and my world froze. I mean, I was overwhelmed. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to process things. And I made a split-second decision. And I said that I didn't know that Miss Lee had left me her estate. Obviously, that was a poor choice. But in that moment, I was so stressed, I didn't know what to do.
What would happen to Miss Lee's estate if the plaintiff is successful with the lawsuit?
Stevie would get all of Miss Lee's estate, and the will that Stevie was specifically excluded from, that one would get overturned.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Cross.
Yes, Your Honor. Hi, Miss Mars. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am, I can hear you.
Ma'am, I want to start off by talking about Agatha Lee's will. In early 2018, you found out you were going to inherit Agatha's estate. Is that right?
Yes, when she showed me her letter to Stevie.
You knew that included her house, right?
Yes, ma'am.
That included the rights to her famous book, right?
Yes, ma'am, she told me it did.
And that included almost $20 million in cash. Is that right?
To my understanding, yes.
Actually, ma'am, when you first found out about the will, you thought you were inheriting even more money. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't come from any high background. I didn't know how wealthy Miss Lee was. And when she initially told me she was leaving her estate, I had no idea how much money it was.
Ma'am, you actually have a sick sibling. Is that right?
Yeah, and at this point, there's not much we can do to help her.
Ma'am, in your own words, your family needed Agatha's money. Is that right?
Yeah, and that's why I sent them the money that I got from every check I earned. I mean, I didn't need any living expenses here, so I gave them the money they needed.
Well, Ms. Mars, I want to be clear here. When you spoke to the lawyers in the deposition, you told them that your family needed Agatha's money from the will. Is that right?
Not specifically. The will would have just helped me take care of them in the future. And eventually I would support them fully.
So, ma'am, you agree with me. $20 million from the will would help you support your family, right?
In the future, yes, ma'am. I was doing okay then. I had everything under control, but of course, in the future, the money would have helped.
In your own words, that kind of money would change your life.
Of course, I could take care of my family for a long time.
Mr. Nybar, could we get that timeline on the screen? And I want to go ahead and focus in on the 14th. Now, ma'am, you're claiming today that Agatha Lee never was planning on removing you from her will. Is that right?
No, not that I had heard.
You've been sitting here in court all day today, right?
Yes, ma'am, I have.
You heard when Stevie Rogers testified, right?
I did.
You heard Stevie Rogers say, well, her grandmother told her she was leaving all the money to Stevie, right?
I heard her say that today, but I don't know where she got that from. That's not the conversation I heard on that morning.
All right, ma'am, you're claiming Stevie Rogers is wrong. Is that right?
I don't know where she's coming from, but no, that's not the conversation I heard.
All right, ma'am, I want to talk about what you did right after the conversation between Agatha Lee and Stevie Rogers. Right after that conversation, you got in your car, right?
Yeah, to take Miss Lee to lunch.
And after you dropped Agatha off at lunch, you went to a pharmacy. Is that right?
I did. It was a routine stop. Usually we had to go every 2 or 3 times a week.
You were there sometime between 12 and 1:30, right?
That sounds right. I can't tell you exactly.
Ms. Mars, when you walked into that pharmacy on August 14th, you knew Agatha Lee was allergic to chloroandramine, right?
Yeah, I knew to avoid it at all costs.
You knew just one pill of chloroandramine could stop Agatha's heart?
Yes, ma'am.
And ma'am, you knew chloroandramine was available over the counter at a pharmacy. Is that right?
Yeah, that's why when I bought any medications, even for myself, I double checked the labels to make sure I didn't get any with chloroandramine in it. I had to be careful.
Well, Ms. Mars, it's your testimony that you didn't purchase chloroandramine that day. Do I have that right?
Yes, ma'am, because I did not.
Well, you don't have a receipt from your purchase on August 14th, do you?
No, like I said, it was a routine visit to the pharmacy and I didn't get a receipt.
Well, you don't have a credit card statement from your visit to the pharmacy that day, do you?
No, ma'am, I paid in cash.
In fact, ma'am, you're claiming you don't even remember what you bought. Is that right?
No, because it was so normal. I didn't think of anything of it.
And you know that a bag containing chloroandramine was found in your closet?
Yes, I've been told that.
Ms. Morris, on direct examination, you said that closet was a storage closet. Is that right?
Yes, because it was. Miss Lee used it. I had a few of my belongings in there as well, but she came in and out fairly often.
Ms. Mars, this closet, it wasn't in the hallway of Lee Manor, was it?
No, I mean, they had just renovated my room to have me live there, so it was in my room as well.
That's right, ma'am. It wasn't in Agatha Lee's room, right?
No, ma'am, it was not.
To get to that closet, you had to go in your room.
Yeah, but my door didn't have a lock, so people could get in if they needed to access the closet.
Ma'am, that's a yes to my question. That closet is in your room?
That's correct.
Ma'am, the police asked you if you had ever touched that bag containing chloroandramine, didn't they?
They did.
And just a moment ago, Ms. Burdett, she asked you that same question, right?
Yeah, and I said, I can't say for sure. I don't think I did, but I don't know. I didn't see it.
Ma'am, what you told the police It wasn't, I can't say for sure. You said never. Is that right?
Yeah, because I don't remember touching that bag.
Ma'am, you know your fingerprint was found on that bag.
Yes, I was told that.
Ms. Mars, I want to go ahead and talk about what happened after Agatha Lee died.
Okay.
You were at Agatha Lee's will reading, weren't you?
Yeah, I was.
You heard the lawyer read out your name as the sole beneficiary of Agatha's estate?
Yeah, I heard him read it. Everybody looked at me.
And ma'am, when that happened, you stood up, didn't you?
Yeah, I knew I needed to get out of there. It was so much. It was so overwhelming.
Well, ma'am, before you left the room, you covered your mouth with your hands, right? And you said, I had no idea.
Yeah, like I said, it was a split-second decision, and I shouldn't have said that, but I pretended like I didn't know.
You said, I had no idea over and over again, right?
Yeah, I know I said it a couple of times.
Ma'am, that was a lie.
Yeah, obviously I shouldn't have made that choice, but again, I was just so stressed in the moment that I made a decision that I shouldn't have.
Mr. Nybart, could we get Exhibit 13 on the screen? Your Honor, this was previously entered into evidence. Ma'am, this is an email you wrote 7 months before Agatha's will reading, is that right?
Yeah, it was when I just had heard that I was being left her estate.
7 months before you said, I had no idea? You said, I get everything. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's what Miss Leah told me.
Thank you, Ms. Mars. Your Honor, I have nothing further at this time.
Thank you. Any redirect examination?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just ask that Miss Mars be allowed to step down.
Ms. Mars, you are excused, and defense may call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. Defense calls Ryan Cabrera. May I proceed?
You may.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hi, how are you? My name is Orion Cabrera.
Where are you from, sir?
Originally, I'm from Boston, but I move around a lot, partially because of my job, partially because I keep getting evicted because my neighbors keep filing nuisance complaints against me, but now I live in Midlands.
What do you do for a living?
I actually write biographies, so usually I'm the one asking other people what they do for a living, so a little bit opposite right now, but Mr. Shredder, you're doing a great job. Keep it up.
Thank you. What have you written about, or who have you written about, rather?
Oh, basically everybody. Heroes like Tom Brady before 2020 and villains like Tom Brady after 2020. But my biggest project was about Agatha Lee. She's a famous author.
Well, how did you become Miss Lee's biographer?
Well, way back in 2015, I sent her a letter asking if I could write a book about her. And like most women I talked to, she didn't respond exactly. But then 3 years later, she sent me a letter asking me to come over, saying that she wanted me to write her book. So I went over.
And how long did you work with Agatha Lee?
I think that was about 6 months, starting in February all the way through August. I mean, she and I became very close, didn't expect to become friends with an 82-year-old woman, but Agatha was very nice, and we met every week to interview her.
Well, sir, did you meet her at her house?
Yes, I did. Very, very large house. Agatha was rolling.
And who else was at her house when you visited her?
For the most part, for the first 5 months, it was just this lady named Drew Mars. I think she was Agatha's nurse. She was there most of the time.
Well, then let's talk about Miss Mars. What did you observe about her relationship with Miss Lee?
They seemed pretty close. At first, I thought Drew was her granddaughter. I mean, Agatha loved all this old people stuff, playing backgammon, shuffleboard, eating dinner at 4:30 p.m. And Drew did all of it with her. They seemed inseparable to me, at least.
Then let's talk about Miss Lee's relationship with the plaintiff in those 5 months. Did you ever hear Miss Lee talk to the plaintiff on the phone?
To Stevie, not exactly. I heard her talking about Stevie, kind of complaining, but I never heard them talking to each other, no.
Did you see any emails or letters from the plaintiff to Miss Lee?
I never saw any of that, sorry.
Did you ever get a chance to meet the plaintiff?
Yeah, actually, I did. I went in for an interview on July 6th, I think, 2018. I saw Stevie sitting in the living room. I didn't know Stevie and Agatha had been talking, but Agatha looked real happy. She had a smile. All her dentures were showing and everything. It was quite kind of heartwarming.
Well, you say that Agatha Lee seemed happy, but I want to be clear. In the next few months, did you ever hear Miss Lee say she was planning to give the plaintiff money?
I didn't hear that, no.
Did you hear Miss Lee say she wanted to write the plaintiff back into her will?
Oh, no, I definitely didn't hear that, no.
When was the last time you met Agatha Lee?
That was August 14th, 2018. I took Agatha out to lunch for an interview. Usually I go someplace nice, but Olive Garden was closed that day, so we went to a steakhouse instead. I thought Agatha seemed a little sad, maybe because we didn't have the breadsticks, but so I asked her why she was sad.
And what did Miss Lee say?
I asked her why she was sad, and she said, I hope Stevie forgives me. I hope I made the right decision. Stevie asked me for something, and I had to say no.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay.
Response?
Your Honor, we actually contend that this statement falls under Rule 8033. Specifically, in Rule 8033, the last sentence allows for statements of memory as they pertain to the terms of a will. It's a very specific exception, and we actually think this fits the bill. We contend that this conversation that Agatha Lee has with Ryan Cabrera, in which she says, Stevie asked me for something and I had to say no. She was referring to the conversation immediately beforehand that she had with the plaintiff. Now, we heard about in the direct examination of Drew Mars, in which she told the plaintiff, no, I'm not allowing you back into the will. Given that that conversation was about the terms of the will, this statement of memory about the terms of the will falls under Rule 803.
Response to that, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
The plaintiff agrees with Mr. Sridhar's reading of 8033. But in order for that exception to apply, this statement has to be about the will or the making of a will. The statement itself was, Stevie asked me for something and I had to say no. Your Honor, in the statement itself, it just says, Stevie asked me for something. We don't know what they were talking about, if they were talking about the will or anything else. And because Mr. Sridhar can't lay that foundation, it doesn't apply to 8033.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
Now, the burden for evidentiary issues is the preponderance of the evidence. We don't have to prove that it's certain that Agatha Lee was talking about that will. We just have to show it's more likely than not. To this point in trial, Your Honor, the only thing that we've heard that Stevie Rogers asked for on August 14 was re-inclusion into the will. And Ms. Lee's other statements, I hope I made the right decision, I hope Stevie forgives me, going to the gravity of the decision, that makes it all the more likely that she was in fact talking about that decision she made earlier that day about the terms of the will, to continue to exclude Stevie Rogers from it.
Objection sustained.
Move to strike defending testimony, Your Honor.
So stricken.
You said that you heard Agatha Lee say, I hope I made the right decision. I hope Stevie forgives me. Did you ever hear from Miss Lee again?
I know that was the last time I talked to Agatha. I went home and
Your Honor, if I could just object again, I believe Mr. Sridhar reiterated that offending testimony in his question to the witness. I just asked that be stricken from the record.
Your Honor, just to be clear, my assumption was that Mr. Nybart's objection was to the last sentence. We would argue that the first two sentences fall under 8033, and they're statements of hope. That's certainly an emotional state, Your Honor.
Response as to whether this is a statement of hope.
Yes, Your Honor. We don't have a court reporter here, so we don't have the pleasure of hearing Mr. Sridhar's statement again. But I believe he reiterated that entire sentence that he had testified to earlier. And we had a problem with the latter half of that portion, but not that first part, which talked about hope and what Miss Lee hoped to do. So that's fine with the plaintiff, Your Honor.
Okay, you may continue.
Your Honor, before we continue, just for the clarity of the record, are the statements, I hope I made the right decision, and I hope Stevie forgives me on the record and admit it?
That's my understanding. Is there any objection to that particular statement, Mr. Nybart?
No objection for the plaintiff, Your Honor.
That's in the record.
Yes, Your Honor. Did you ever hear from Miss Lee again after that, sir?
No, after that conversation, that was the last time. Next morning, I got a call from Drew Mars. She was sobbing through the phone. I couldn't understand her, but eventually I found out Agatha had passed.
Thank you, sir. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross, Your Honor. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
Mr. Cabrera, before I begin, can you hear and see me okay?
Yeah, you're looking sharp.
Thank you, sir. Now, you talked about an interaction you had with Ms. Lee in August of 2018. I want to talk about something you saw in May of that same year, all right?
Sure.
Now, in May of 2018, you saw the defendant, Drew Mars, walk into Agatha Lee's bedroom, right?
Yeah, she was Agatha's nurse. She walked in there a lot.
That's right. You saw the defendant walk into Miss Lee's bedroom, and she was holding two things in her hand, right?
Yeah, I think it was a glass of water and then some pills that Agatha took.
That's right, sir. In one hand, she had a glass of water, and in the other hand, she had a pill, right?
Yeah, Agatha was real old. She took a lot of pills. That's right.
As the defendant approached Miss Lee, she started telling Miss Lee what pill she was giving her. She started describing that pill, right?
That's right. What the pill was, what it had in it, stuff like that.
Now, sir, when Miss Lee heard that, she told Drew Mars, skip the recitation. You know I'll take whatever you hand me. She said that, right?
Yeah, I don't know what recitation means, but yeah, it makes sense. I'd probably take what my nurse gave me too.
Sir, that's a yes to my question. Miss Lee said, you know I'll take whatever you hand me. She said that, right?
That's right, Mr. Nybot.
Now, sir, I want to talk about your relationship with Agatha Lee. Now, you were writing a biography about her, right?
That's right.
Sir, so of course you know that Miss Lee wrote a novel at age 32 called Death in a Bottle, right?
Yeah, I think everybody knows that.
Sir, that book, it was pretty popular.
Yeah, pretty popular with all the old people, written back in the 60s. You're right.
It was translated into 100 languages, right?
That sounds about right, yeah.
Sir, that book, it sold 65 million copies, right?
Yeah,
Judging Your Honor, at this point, irrelevance?
Response?
Yes, Your Honor, we're going to establish that this witness was or desired some of the books that Miss Lee wrote after this book. We're establishing that Miss Lee had written a popular book and that she had several unpublished books that this witness wanted to acquire after her death. It's going to go to the witness's bias, Your Honor.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
My understanding is that this book in question, Death in a Bottle, was not one of the books that would be offered to this witness. The financial success of this book is neither here nor there. Mr. Nybart wants to ask this witness about the financial successes of other books that this witness may have been offered, then that's certainly relevant, but this isn't, Your Honor. In fact, it would be highly misleading for the jury to assume that the other books would have the same sort of commercial attributes as this one.
Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, sir, like we were saying, Death in a Bottle, that book was pretty popular, right?
That's right, sir, yes.
Now, sir, when you first met Miss Lee, you thought she never wrote a second book, right?
That's what I thought. She did. I didn't read any.
Mr. Cabrera, you'd agree with me, you wondered why Miss Lee never wrote a second novel, right?
Yeah, I thought it was maybe because she didn't want to make a bad sequel like Cars 2 or something, but I never knew why.
Yeah, that's right, sir. You wondered, right?
That's right.
Sir, you'd agree with me that you believe that if Miss Lee wrote another book, well, that second book would be pretty popular, right?
Could be, yeah.
Now, sir, you understand that Miss Lee actually did, in fact, write other books, but she just never published them, right?
Yeah, I think she just stopped writing some halfway through. She had all of them in her library.
That's right, sir. On August 14th, you asked Miss Lee about those other books, and she told you she had a collection of unpublished books in her study, right?
Exactly right.
Sir, you'd agree with me, those books, those unpublished novels, they're extremely valuable, right?
I don't know, maybe.
Well, sir, you can't even fathom, in your own words, how much those books would be worth, right?
Yeah, I don't know how much they'd be worth.
Sir, in your own words, you can't even fathom how much those books would be worth, right?
Yeah, like I said, I don't know how much they'd be worth.
Sir, I want to talk about why you're here testifying in court today. Now, you're familiar with Agatha Lee's will, right?
That's right, yeah.
And you recognize that will in court today?
Probably, yeah.
Miss Meta, can we see that will, please? Now, sir, this is Agatha Lee's will that she wrote in 2018, right?
Yeah, it looks like it.
It looks like a fair and accurate copy, right?
Yeah.
It has not been changed or altered in any way, right?
I don't think so.
Your Honor, this time the plaintiff moves Exhibit 9 into evidence.
Any objection?
None, Your Honor.
Exhibit 9 is admitted.
Now, sir, you know that this will establishes that Drew Mars would inherit Agatha Lee's entire estate, right?
That's right. I leave my entire estate to Drew Mars so long as Drew survives me. I specifically intend to exclude Stevie Rogers, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you're right.
Sir, that's a yes to my question. It says that Drew Mars would get Agatha Lee's entire estate, right?
That's what it says, yeah.
It says Drew Mars would get Agatha Lee's real and personal property, right?
Yeah, I don't know what property wouldn't be real, but that's what it says.
Sir, those books we mentioned, those unpublished novels, that would be included in the real and personal property of Miss Lee, right?
That's right. The books, they are real.
Now, sir, 2 months ago, the defendant actually called you on the phone, right?
Yeah, June.
That's right, sir. In June of 2020, the defendant asked you something pretty important, right?
Did she?
Well, sir, the defendant asked you to testify in these court proceedings. You'd agree with me, right?
Oh, yeah, she did do that.
Sir, you agreed to testify for her, right?
Yeah, I had known Agatha for a long time at that point, so I agreed to, yeah.
Sir, and right after you agreed to testify for the defendant, she asked you another question, right?
Yeah, she asked me if I wanted anything from Agatha's estate. I said it'd be nice to have the books. I'd like to read them sometime.
Well, hold on, sir, we'll get there. But right after you agreed to testify for the defendant, she asked if you wanted anything of Agatha's, right?
Yeah, like I said, I wanted the books.
You told her you wanted those books, right?
Yeah, I wanted to read them.
And the defendant told you that at the end of today's trial, she still possessed those books. You could have them, right?
Yeah, it's nice of her.
Sir, you know that if Drew Mars loses this trial, if Stevie Rogers wins, the defendant won't be in possession of those books that Agatha wrote, right?
I think so.
Those same books that you want, right?
Yeah, but I think I gotta just ask Stevie.
But sir, that's a yes to my question. You know that if Drew Mars loses this trial, she won't be in possession of those books that you want, right? Those unpublished novels.
I think that's how it works, yes.
Thank you, sir. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
None, Your Honor. The witness would be excused.
Mr. Cabrera, you're excused. Any further witnesses for the defense?
None, Your Honor. At this time, the defense rests. We'd ask for a few minutes before closing arguments, if that's all right.
Okay, we can take a few minutes.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, are all of the judges back and ready to go? All right, I think we have everybody back, so we're ready to begin whenever you're ready, Your Honor.
We are ready to begin with closing arguments. Everyone should have their computers on speaker view. And plaintiff's counsel, you can proceed when you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, Mr. Sridhar, members of the jury. Now, there have been a lot of things said from the beginning to the end of today's trial, but there was one moment that stood out to me in particular. The defendant took the stand today and told you under oath that after Agatha Lee was killed, she lied. She said she knew nothing about the will when in reality, she did. Members of the jury, the defendant was lying on August 20th of 2018, and she was lying to us today. Because the defendant doesn't want us to know about her desperation for Agatha's money. She doesn't want us to know about the drugs she used to kill Agatha Lee. She doesn't want us to know about her deceit after the murder. Members of the jury, desperation, drugs, and deceit. That's all this case comes down to. Now, before we talk about the evidence that points to the defendant, I want to talk about the law. Because today you heard that Drew Mars was going to inherit Agatha Lee's entire estate. That's nearly $20 million. But members of the jury, in this state, if you kill someone, you can't inherit their money. It doesn't matter if you're in the will or not. But members of the jury, that's exactly what happened in today's case. That's why Stevie Rogers has sued Drew Mars to stop the defendant from walking away with her grandmother's entire fortune. So as the plaintiff, we had to prove that Drew Mars knowingly or purposely killed Agatha Lee, in other words, that the defendant intentionally ended Agatha Lee's life. Now, members of the jury, some of you might have seen shows like Law and Order, where the attorneys, they had to prove their charges beyond a reasonable doubt, but this isn't a murder trial. We don't have to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt. All we have to show is that it's more likely than not that Drew Mars killed Agatha Lee. And members of the jury, the answer to that question is yes. Because when you go back to deliberate today, I want you to focus on three things: desperation, drugs, and deceit. Focus on the defendant's desperation for Agatha's money. Focus on the drugs she used to kill her. Focus on her deceit after the murder. Because members of the jury, if you do, you'll see that Drew Mars killed Agatha Lee and she is liable. But let's take those one at a time. First, the defendant's desperation, because today, members of the jury, we heard the defendant, she needed money. She had a sick sister back at home, a sick relative that she needed to help. But the defendant, at first, she thought she was going to be okay. She knew she was in Agatha Lee's will. She knew she would be taken care of after Agatha Lee died. But members of the jury, that all came crashing down on August 14th. When the defendant overheard a conversation between Agatha Lee and Stevie Rogers, where Miss Lee told Stevie Rogers she was going to put her in the will and take Drew Mars out. Members of the jury, when the defendant heard that, she panicked. She had to do something to stop Miss Lee from changing her will. She got desperate. And members of the jury, just hours later, Miss Lee was found dead. Which takes us to our next point, the drugs. Because today we heard that Drew Mars was Agatha Lee's caretaker. Agatha Lee trusted the defendant implicitly. She even told the defendant, "You know I'll take whatever you hand me." So when Drew Mars got desperate, when she knew her money was in jeopardy, she knew she had a way out. The drugs. Because today you heard about something called chloroandramine. It's an over-the-counter medication, but Agatha Lee, she had a fatal allergy to it. The defendant even told Stevie Rogers that just one pill and Agatha would be dead. And members of the jury, today we heard that chlorandramine looks identical to one of Agatha Lee's daily medications. So when the time came, when the defendant had to act, she knew what to do. She swapped the drugs. She drugged Agatha Lee. She gave her the medication that would kill her. And members of the jury, how do we know that? Well, we heard about exhibits 14, 15, and 17. And this shows us that it was Drew Mars, not Stevie Rogers, who had a bag of chlorandramine in her closet. It was Drew Mars, not Stevie Rogers, whose fingerprint was found right on that bag. And members of the jury, it was Drew Mars, not Stevie Rogers, who killed Agatha Lee. For members of the jury, that takes us to our next point, the deceit. Because today you heard that on August 20th of 2018, Agatha Lee's will was read aloud to a room full of people. Her lawyer announced that Drew Mars would inherit Agatha Lee's entire estate. And members of the jury, how did the defendant respond? Well, she stood up. She said, I had no idea, and then she walked right out of the room. Members of the jury, she acted surprised. She acted shocked. But that's all it was, an act. Because today you heard that 6 months earlier, in February of 2018, the defendant wrote an email to a friend. She said, Agatha just told me she changed her will to leave everything to me. I get everything, the house, the money, everything. We're talking millions of dollars. This is going to totally change my life. So members of the jury, I want you to ask yourselves, why would the defendant lie? If she had nothing to do with this crime, if she was just an innocent bystander like she claims, why would she get up and make a scene in front of a room full of people? If the defendant was an innocent bystander, if she had nothing to do with this crime, why wouldn't she be upfront about getting the money? Well, members of the jury, we know why. The defendant wasn't an innocent bystander. She was trying to cover up what she had done. But the defense wants you to focus on a different story. They don't want you to focus on the defendant's deception, the drugs, or her deceit. They want you to think that Stevie Rogers, Agatha Lee's own granddaughter, poisoned her. It took those chlorandramine pills, put it in that black bag, closed the zipper, and put it in the defendant's closet. But members of the jury, did we find Stevie Rogers' fingerprints on that bag? On the pills inside the bag? In Drew Mars' closet? In Drew Mars' bedroom at all? No. But then the defense wants you to think that Drew Mars just accidentally touched the bag zipper. After she told the police she never touched it at all. Members of the jury, does that sound likely or reasonable to you? Because to me, it just simply doesn't. But if you're still not convinced, if you still agree with Mr. Streetar, if you think this was a murder, but it wasn't Mars, I want you to think about the defendant's own words. The things she said before she even walked into the courtroom today. I get everything, the house, the money, everything. Just one pill, and Agatha would be dead. I had no idea. Members of the jury, when you listen to the defendant's own words, all you're going to hear is desperation, drugs, and deceit. And that's why we're asking you to hold her accountable. We're asking you to find her liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Defense, you may proceed when you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court, members of the jury, it was murder, but it wasn't Mars. On August 15, 2018, Drew Mars found Agatha Lee dead in her bedroom at 82 years old. And minutes later, Ms. Mars told the plaintiff, and the plaintiff's reaction, as you heard today, was immediate. The plaintiff didn't stand there shocked. The plaintiff's immediate reaction to finding out her only living family member was dead was to hire a private investigator. And by the time that investigator arrived, the plaintiff was already calling Drew Mars a murderer. Think about that. In less than an hour, the plaintiff went from being told her grandmother was dead to calling it a murder and choosing a culprit. And if you want to know how the plaintiff got to that point so fast, without an autopsy, a toxicology report, really any evidence, it's pretty simple. The plaintiff went to sleep the previous night knowing her grandmother would be dead when she woke up. The plaintiff went to sleep knowing that a piece of evidence was planted behind an unlocked door. The plaintiff went to sleep knowing she was well on her way to being $25 million richer. And the plaintiff knew all of that for a fact, because it's easy to be confident when you're the killer. It's easy to be confident when you're planning to pin it on someone else. And Mr. Nybart is right. There were desperation, drugs, and deceit, and this was murder. But it wasn't Mars. It was the plaintiff. And this very lawsuit, this trial, a lawsuit filed 5 days after that death, it's the last step in the plaintiff's plan. See, at the end of the day, this trial is about Agatha Lee's $25 million estate, whether it goes to the plaintiff or Drew Mars. And we know that Agatha Lee made her choice. She wrote it in a will, had it signed and witnessed. And she wanted it all to go to Drew Mars. And that's a legally binding document. With one exception, an exception the plaintiff admitted she's known about for a while. This law. If the plaintiff could make sure Agatha Lee was dead, but she could blame Drew Mars for it, then that will would be overturned. And the plaintiff would get everything, no matter what Miss Lee wanted. You members of the jury, this time it wasn't enough for the plaintiff to point at someone and call her a killer. The plaintiff needed to prove it by a preponderance of the evidence. And plain and simple, they didn't. It was a murder, but it wasn't Mars. First, we're going to talk about how we know the killer wasn't Drew Mars, how that story falls apart when you start asking questions about it. And then even though we don't have a burden of proof, we'll show you why we agree there's a murderer in this courtroom. But it's the woman who's been making accusations for 2 years. Members of the jury, when you look at the plaintiff's story, you have to look for a motive and a means, an explanation for why Miss Mars would kill Agatha Lee and how they think that she did it. So let's start with the motive. What Mr. Nybart keeps on calling desperation. And Mr. Nybart's a good salesman, but that's a hard sell because you met Drew Mars today. She isn't a greedy woman. She's had one employer her whole life. Agatha Lee. She was a devoted caretaker, and it's true. She had a sibling with medical issues. We heard about that today. But the plaintiff is telling you that Drew Mars saw those bills and she didn't take out a loan. She didn't ask Agatha Lee for a raise. She decided to kill Agatha Lee, the person who had been paying her generously for 10 years. And that is the sort of leap the plaintiff just can't ask you to make, not when they have the burden of proof. Members of the jury, it shouldn't surprise you that the only evidence the plaintiff has really presented of motive is the plaintiff's own word. And the plaintiff claims that on the morning of August 14th, she and Agatha Lee had a conversation. In that conversation, she says, Agatha Lee told her, I'm going to give you the whole estate. I'm going to make you, Stevie Rogers, the sole inheritor. Members of the jury, that conversation is a really important part of the plaintiff's story. They say that's when she went from being a caretaker to a killer. So what does it say that there is no evidence to back that account up? And Ms. Bond, the plaintiff's own investigator, said, I took the plaintiff's word for it. And of course she did. The plaintiff was her paying customer. And you heard from Drew Mars today, and you heard that conversation went the opposite direction. That Stevie Rogers asked to be let back in the will, and Agatha Lee said, no, I'm not going to give you a cent. When you have to choose between two accounts, you have to look at the corroborating evidence. Right after that conversation, we know Miss Lee went to lunch with a man named Ryan Cabrera. And what Mr. Cabrera told us, it matches Drew Mars's account, not the plaintiff's. Agatha Lee, looking downcast, saying, I hope I made the right decision. I hope Stevie forgives me. And those aren't the words of a woman who just promised the plaintiff $25 million to play with. Members of the jury, when you look at the evidence, it just doesn't paint the picture of Drew Mars as someone who was motivated to kill him. And if you want to know why, it's because she isn't a killer. And this was a murder, but it wasn't Mars. And then you have to ask the plaintiff how they think Drew Mars killed Agatha Lee. And members of the jury, this part of the story, the drugs, as Mr. Nybar talks about it, that's where it becomes pretty obvious that the plaintiff's story is going to fall apart. Because to believe the plaintiff, you have to believe that Drew Mars is both incredibly deceitful and incredibly stupid. Remember the fingerprints, members of the jury? You remember there were none on the bottle? You have to believe that when Drew Mars was opening that bottle of chloroandramine, she was wearing gloves, so she wouldn't get any smudges or fingerprints on it. But then when she zipped up that bag, she took the gloves off. Members of the jury, don't forget, we heard today there are fingerprints on that bag that the police couldn't trace. Fingerprints that could belong to anyone, including the plaintiff. Members of the jury, to believe the plaintiff, you have to believe that Drew Mars poisoned someone she worked for 10 years. Then she didn't throw away the chloroandramine, didn't destroy it. She kept it in her unlocked door, in her unlocked closet for a week and waited for the police to come find it. Members of the jury, if you have to believe that someone is simultaneously evil and stupid to an extreme degree, there's a pretty good chance that person's being set up. Members of the jury, we know it's murder, not Mars. How do we know it's the plaintiff? It's simple, and I think Mr. Nybar has said it best. And Ms. Mehta said it too at the start of trial. Desperation, drugs, deceit. The plaintiff's desperation for more money to burn, the drugs she used to kill Agatha Lee, and then the deceit. This whole setup. And let's start with the desperation. Because you learned today that in 2008, the plaintiff inherited $2 million. And she was in line to get Agatha Lee's money too. So what does she do? For the next 10 years, she basically pretends her grandmother doesn't exist. And she never works a real job. And in 2018, the plaintiff is finally cut out of the will. But remember, she wasn't sweating it because she still had that trust fund. Until June of 2018. And at that point, members of the jury, when the plaintiff has finally burned $2 million, she thinks, you know who still has money? My grandma, who disinherited me from the will. Let me get back in her good graces. And sure enough, a month later, she's visiting her grandmother for the first time in 7 years. And members of the jury, we agree that on the morning of August 14th, the plaintiff had a conversation with Agatha Lee about the will. The balance of evidence tells us that Agatha Lee said no. And members of the jury, then Ms. Lee left the plaintiff home alone. And the plaintiff was remembering a few important things. First, that drug that her grandma was allergic to, she could buy it over the counter. And second, Drew Mars's bedroom didn't have a lock on it. And if the plaintiff could kill Agatha Lee but pin it on Drew Mars, she'd get the whole estate anyway. So the plan was simple. Get the pills, put 2 in the pill organizer, put the rest in Drew Mars's unlocked bedroom. And if Miss Mars saw that bag, members of the jury, that strange bag, and tried to pick it up, well, then the plaintiff would get forensic evidence too. Members of the jury, at that point, all the plaintiff would have to do was wait for Drew Mars to find the body and accuse her of murder. It's true, members of the jury. It's true that Drew Mars didn't tell the full truth at that will reading. It's true that she was frightened. It's true that she made a bad decision. Members of the jury, she was the victim of a setup. She was scared. Because this was murder. But it wasn't Mars. It was the plaintiff. And we can't bring Agatha Lee back, but we can make sure her estate goes to the right person. The person illegally binding documents said it ought to go to. Fine for Drew Mars. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Is rebuttal permitted in this jurisdiction? And if so, do you have time for it?
Yes, Your Honor, rebuttal is permitted, and I believe I have a few minutes.
Okay.
May I proceed?
You may.
Now, members of the jury, let's posit for a moment that Mr. Sridhar is right. That Stevie Rogers is some sort of criminal mastermind, that Drew Mars was set up for this murder. Think about how lucky Stevie Rogers would have to get. She would have to be so lucky that Drew Mars just decided to go to a pharmacy the day before Agatha was found dead. She would have to be so lucky that Drew Mars accidentally touched that bag zipper that was found in her closet. Members of the jury, she would have to be so lucky that Drew Mars would lie to everyone about the will after Miss Lee was murdered. Members of the jury, no one is that lucky. So what's more likely? That Stevie Rogers is some sort of criminal mastermind, or that the defendant got desperate? Her desperation turned her to the drugs that would kill Miss Lee, and that she tried to deceive everyone after the murder. Members of the jury, the answer is clear. Hold the defendant accountable, find her liable. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the round. Could the bailiff chime in and advise us all as to next steps here?
Yes, so I'm going to place the teams in breakout rooms real quick, and then we will finalize the ballots with the judges. Okay, so judges, please finalize your ballots. Once you have finished filling them out, make sure you enter submit and then type in yes. Once you are done with your ballots, go ahead and pop up on the screen when you're finished so I know that you're done.
Elizabeth, I don't seem to have a submit button.
Okay, there should be if you scroll all the way down, there should be a thing that says type in submit.
I am. There we go. Thank you.
Elizabeth, I'm having trouble finding the submit button also.
Okay, if you scroll down, there should be a section that tells you to type in submit at the very bottom of the ballot.
So type in the word submit?
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Ziegler, are you good?
I am indeed.
Okay, perfect. All right, so I am going to bring the competitors back in and we will go ahead and start our comments. Looks like we have everybody back. Judge Nelmark, I will turn it over to you to facilitate comments.
Thank you. I was not watching this from a scoring perspective. I was just trying not to goof up too much on the ruling, since this is by far the largest crowd to ever watch me rule on objections. I was very excited when I heard that AMTA was doing this tournament. It reminded me of our friend, the late Dr. Frank Galuza, who always said how important it was to recognize the seniors, their importance to their programs, and this year the importance of mock trial to those seniors. And I'd like to thank everyone at AMTA that did a great job putting this together with the case and the technology, and all the competitors who put together a tremendous trial on very short order. I think we all would have made him proud, and I thank you all for your participation. With that, I'll do the comments in the way I see people on my screen. Miss O'Byrne, why don't you start?
Sure, and I know there are a lot of folks, so I won't take up a ton of your time. I just want to congratulate everyone. What a way to cap off your senior year. You all did great with the technology, and I think our ballots should be pretty self-explanatory. I think that folks did well with the case. Your themes came through. I thought crosses, and I get it's a weird thing, but I think if there's one thing that could have been improved in this medium, it was the cross examinations. They were a little bit less structured than I've seen them in the past. So I think in general, if we could tighten them up, make them a little bit punchier, that would be the only thing I think could be improved on. And other than that, you'll see in the ballots kind of how I felt the speeches and all that went. But great job, everyone. It was a real pleasure to get to see you guys.
All right, thank you, Mr. Walker.
Hi, everyone. I want to echo Judge Nelmark's comments, acknowledging AMTA's role in putting this tournament together. I cannot imagine what I would have felt as a senior missing out on the opportunity to compete at nationals. So my heart goes out to all of you guys. I was incredibly impressed with everything you guys did. I will keep my comments incredibly brief because at this point, no one cares what any of us have to say. But I would just say the one comment I would make is also about structure. I think in everything you do, just think about setting up a roadmap for the folks who are listening to you. And I purposefully avoided reading the case or reading anything about it so that I could be a blank slate. And so I think structure would be very important to folks who have not been exposed to the case. But all in all, I thought you guys did a phenomenal job, and this was really impressive for you guys to do this with the technology piece included. So thanks.
All right, thank you, Mr. Anderson.
I echo what everyone said before. As a many-year mock trialer myself, I can't imagine being in your position. You guys did great. I agree with the other comments, so I really won't take a lot of time. But I will point out that a lot of the effort that you've put in here is going to come in very handy. In fact, one of the things I'm doing now at my firm is researching how to put on presentations like what you just did. So this is absolutely going to come in very handy for you down the line. And you showed me a trick or two. So I was taking notes, not just on your excellent performances, but on things I can use in the future. If I had any comment, it would be, and I'm just using this as an example, but Mr. Nybart, I know that you at one point pointed right at the camera, and I just point that out because the spatial differences between what's happening on these cameras is going to be just a little different than what you're used to in trial. So I'm used to doing lots of big hand motions as well. But keep in mind that, when we're looking at you, you might be sticking your finger in our face. But otherwise, excellent job, everybody, and thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Okolo.
Thank you. I definitely want to echo everyone's comments and congratulate you all on definitely doing such a spectacular job. I know how it feels going into senior year, not being able to do that last tournament. Similar situation happened to me, but you guys definitely made the best of the situation and killed it. The use of the technology was great. I think you guys did a great job with the timelines and the evidence and pointing things out. I do definitely want to echo the structure comment because I do think some of the crosses could have been a little bit more structured. But I also think that you guys just did a great job with the themes, right? You guys really pulled together the entire case. shout out to the openers. You guys don't get enough love. You guys really like sold those opens, and I was like super invested going into the trial, and that was like very exciting for me. And then you guys had the whole trial, right? And then you guys brought it home with the close. I was like, dang, that was a lot of, I was like, I'm sitting here thinking, still don't know who really did it, because you guys did a really, really good job kind of like selling it and like really being invested in advocating for your clients, right? So you guys did a great job. Like I'm glad I spent the time doing this. Thank you for allowing me to be here. Either team, congratulations.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gowan.
Great job. I thought it was an excellent presentation. I hope you guys can hear me. My internet's been kind of acting up a little bit. I thought you guys did a wonderful job with the Zoom technology. I think you are getting into an area of the law that so many of us who are practitioners are just learning. And I thought it was just an excellent presentation. I would differ from my other esteemed colleagues and say I actually thought your structures were great. I was able to follow everything similar to what Mr. Walker said. I did not review any case materials. So starting with the opening all the way through the closing, I was able to follow everything, and I thought it was an excellent presentation. Great job.
Thank you, Ms. Kimbrough.
Good evening and congratulations to both teams. I, like some of my colleagues, did not read the case. And so I want to also shout out the openers. I thought both did just a fantastic job. I felt like I knew about the case just right from the start. I thought the use of technology was outstanding. The way that you use the demonstratives, I know there was probably a lot of practice and coordination there, so kudos to you guys for that. I agree, I guess, with some points about the structure, but I do think there were a few points on cross that were just outstanding in spite of the technology. And so, and I know that's difficult when you're crossing someone who's not in the room with you. So great job to you all, especially given the time constraints. I know you just got the case several days ago. So I just want to congratulate you on mastering the case and the technology in a short period of time. So congratulations.
Thank you, Ms. Long.
Thank you. So I am so honored that I got to have a chance to judge you guys. This was really awesome. Everybody's already said it, but I know that I could not have pulled off a Zoom trial like that if I had to in a week or two or however long you had. So that's amazing. I just want to say there were a couple things. I don't know if you even care at this point. You're seniors, you're going off, but if you are going to do anything like this again, I thought just really make sure you're paying attention to what's already happened in the trial and pivot. So there were a couple times where one of the witnesses had already conceded things. Like I think the defendant had conceded that she did lie, and I felt like you continued to like prove up that she had lied. And it kind of felt like it was unnecessary and beating a dead horse. Like at that point, great, she already said it. Move on and use it in closing or emphasize it, but you don't have to go through and prove that. And I think that's just something that you didn't know if she was going to concede that or not, so you had already prepared it. But one of the things that is great that you get to do at trial is respond to what's happening and shorten your case when you can. And I also want to give a shout out to the defense closer, because I thought that you took the plaintiff's theme and you co-opted it in your closing, and that was amazing. Really well done on that. So this was just great. Both sides did a really great job, and good luck to you in the future.
Thank you, Ms. Bond.
I just want to congratulate everyone for doing such a stellar job. I'm so glad you had this opportunity. I can't imagine how tough it would be as a senior to hear that, your season had been cut short. I thought that the trial was outstanding. I just wanted to kind of give props to a couple of highlights. I thought that the competitor who played Drew Mars was incredible. I thought you were extremely believable. To me, the case would come down on the merits to the credibility of Stevie Rogers and Drew Mars, and I believed you in a way that sometimes mock trial witnesses just kind of can't bring to the table. So I thought that was a really impressive performance on the witnessing side. I thought all the attorneys did a really good job. I also thought the defense closing was very strong. I thought the plaintiff opening did a great job of setting forward the theme. So there were some key highlights. I don't want to give too many comments. It doesn't matter to any of you, but I know it's being live streamed. So I would just say, a couple comments are, sometimes you just have to front bad things on direct. The bad things are coming on cross, address it in your direct examination. Otherwise, it's going to have a lot more impact on the cross. And this didn't affect my scoring in any way, but I'm going to make a pitch against what I've seen emerge as a mock trial trend for many years. I hate when people say "yeah." I don't like it. Just say "you," "your." I know it's a big trend. Everybody does it. I hate it. So for any of you out there watching who are wondering if you have to go with that trend, I'm just making a pitch for don't. That's it. Thanks, everybody.
All right, last and certainly not least, Dr. Ziegler.
Well, good evening. Thank you all for doing this. You did a marvelous job. I know firsthand how exhausting Zoom technology can be, especially if you're spending a lot of time on it. The intensity of focus is much greater than in person, as intense as mock trial can be. So I commend you for doing such a marvelous job with it, for integrating the technology so smoothly, for not getting flustered by anything. It was wonderful. I also commend the organization joining Judge Nelmark in trying this format and in going with this format for the next year so that we can keep our competitors healthy and make sure they can compete, but in a way that doesn't put them at risk. So I appreciate AMTA doing that. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Judge Nelmark.
I think that has concluded the comments from all the scoring judges, so I'm ready to turn it back over to one of the organizers.
All right, thank you all so much for judging. We couldn't do any of this without you guys being there to judge and give these students feedback. So thank you so much for that. If we can have all of the judges go ahead and turn off their video, we're going to have the AMTA reps come in and announce the winner. All the students should remain on the screen now. It'll take 1 second. We're still waiting for the AMTA reps to actually enter the room, but we will have them in here shortly. The anticipation must just be building for all of you so much.
Hello. I am not here with the results. Normally at the end of a championship round, I am here with the results. But that was going to be Graham and Brian. Graham was having technical difficulties. Brian is here now, so I'm just going to say, make sure you all register and vote. I love you all, and here's Brian.
Hello, I have the great pleasure of being able to announce the winner of the inaugural One Last Time tournament. And that winner is Team 36, Stephen Becker, Sonali Mehta, Georgia Lala, Elias Nybert, and Isabel Penland. Congratulations, guys.
Congrats, y'all. That was a great trial.
Thank you. Great job, you guys.
Good job, guys.
Fantastic job, everyone. And it was with a record of 7-1-1, and we'll be circulating the final tab summary shortly once I figure out how to upload it as a PDF.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Have a great weekend and